The Mafia boss saw the marks on little girl arm, and the city came to a standstill. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The city was alive with its usual afternoon rhythm. Cars honked, people rushed past each other on crowded sidewalks, and the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows between the tall buildings. Kieran Voss had just stepped out of another business meeting, his mind still calculating numbers and strategies. He was a man who commanded respect wherever he went. Some called him brilliant, others whispered that he was cold. Both were probably right. He was heading toward his car when he noticed something that made him pause. A little girl, no more than 8 years old, was walking along the sidewalk carrying a worn backpack that looked too heavy for her small frame. Her shoes were scuffed and slightly too big. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail that had come loose on one side. She moved carefully, as if she was trying not to take up too much space in the world. Then it happened. She tripped on an uneven crack in the pavement and fell forward, catching herself with her hands. Her backpack tumbled off her shoulder. A few people glanced over but kept walking. The city never stopped moving. Kieran found himself walking toward her before he even realized what he was doing. "Hey there," he said gently, crouching down to her level. "Are you all right?" The little girl looked up at him with wide eyes. For a moment she seemed startled, as if kindness from a stranger was something unusual. She nodded quickly and started to stand up on her own. "Let me help you," Kieran offered, reaching out his hand. She hesitated, then took it. Her hand was so small in his. As he helped her to her feet and picked up her backpack, something caught his eye. On her forearm, partially hidden by her sleeve, were small marks. Recent ones. They formed a pattern that made his chest tighten. "What happened here?" he asked softly, carefully pulling back her sleeve just slightly. The girl's face changed. The brief openness disappeared, replaced by something that looked practiced. She pulled her arm back and tugged the sleeve down quickly. "I fell," she said automatically, her voice quiet and rehearsed. Kieran studied her face. He had negotiated with powerful people his entire life. He knew when someone was telling the truth and when they were reciting lines they had memorized. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Maren," she whispered. "Maren. That's a beautiful name." He handed her the backpack, noticing how she winced slightly when she took it, as if her shoulders hurt. "Do you live around here?" She nodded, pointing vaguely down the street. "Is someone waiting for you at home?" Her expression shifted again. Something flickered in her eyes, something that looked like fear mixed with resignation. She bit her lower lip and looked down at her worn shoes. Kieran felt an unfamiliar sensation building in his chest. He had built an empire by staying detached, by making logical decisions without emotion clouding his judgment. But this little girl, standing in front of him with secrets hiding behind her eyes, was breaking through walls he didn't even know he still had. "Maren," he said carefully, "who made those marks on your arm?" The noise of the city seemed to fade. The cars, the voices, the rushing footsteps, all of it became distant. Maren looked up at him, then down at the sidewalk. Her small hands gripped the straps of her backpack tightly. For several long seconds, she didn't speak. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said something that would echo in Kieran's mind for days to come. "It's okay," she breathed, her words carrying the weight of someone far older than 8. "I'm used to it." Kieran froze. The world kept moving around them, but he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. This child, this small, fragile child, wasn't asking for help. She wasn't crying or pleading or even looking for comfort. She was asking for permission to suffer in silence. And in that moment, something fundamental shifted inside Kieran Voss. He realized that this wasn't just about a little girl with marks on her arm. This was about every time someone had looked away, every time someone had chosen comfort over courage, every time someone had decided that someone else's pain wasn't their responsibility. He had spent decades being that person. Not anymore. Maren Holloway lived in a small house on the edge of the city, where the streets were quieter and the buildings shorter. From the outside, it looked like any other home on the block, a modest house with faded paint and a small front yard that needed attention. But inside, life had become something very different from what it used to be. Every morning, Maren followed the same quiet routine. She would wake up before anyone else, carefully fold her blanket so it took up less space on her bed, and tiptoe to the kitchen. There, she would open the old tin where her mother kept crackers and count them. 6 crackers meant it might be a good day. 3 crackers meant she should save half of whatever she got at school lunch. Today, there were 4 crackers. She took one, eating it slowly to make it last longer, then carefully closed the tin without making noise. Noise was something she had learned to avoid. In the living room, her mother, Celeste, lay on the worn couch under a thin blanket. She had been sick for a long time, the kind of sick that doctors couldn't seem to fix completely. Some days she could smile and ask Maren about school. Other days she barely had the energy to lift her head. Today looked like it might be one of the hard days. Maren didn't wake her. Instead, she quietly gathered her school things, double-checked that her homework was in her backpack, and slipped out the front door. The school was a 20-minute walk. Maren had memorized every crack in the sidewalk, every turn, every safe place to cross the street. She walked with her head down, her backpack heavy on her small shoulders. At school, she was invisible in the best possible way. She sat in the middle of the classroom, never in the front where teachers might ask too many questions, never in the back where the loud kids caused trouble. She completed her assignments neatly and turned them in without comment. During recess, she sat on a bench and watched the other children play, sometimes reading a library book she had borrowed weeks ago. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had noticed things. The way Maren always wore long sleeves even on warm days. The way she flinched slightly when someone raised their voice. The way she never brought lunch money and rarely had a packed lunch. Mrs. Patterson had filed reports. She had mentioned her concerns to the school counselor. But reports got lost in the system, and concerns faded when there were 30 other students who also needed attention. After school, Maren walked home the same careful way. She opened the front door quietly and found her father, Dale, sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread in front of him. He used to be different. She remembered that vaguely, like a dream. He used to laugh and pick her up and call her his little bird. But that was before he lost his job, before her mother got sicker, before everything changed. Now, Dale spent his days looking at job listings that never called back, and his evenings finding ways to forget how hopeless he felt. "Hi, Daddy," Maren said softly. He looked up briefly, his eyes tired and distant. "Hey, kid. Your mom's resting. Try to keep it down." Maren nodded and went to her small room. She sat on her bed and pulled out her homework, working carefully by the fading afternoon light. She had learned not to turn on too many lights. Electricity cost money, and money was always a problem. Later, when the sun had set and the house grew darker, she heard a familiar knock at the door. Her stomach tightened. It was Garrett, her father's old friend. He came around a lot lately, always bringing bottles in brown paper bags, always staying too long. When Garrett was in the house, the air felt heavier. He never yelled or caused obvious trouble, but something about him made Maren feel like she needed to disappear even more than usual. She would hide in her room, holding her worn stuffed bear, a gift from better days, and wait for him to leave. Tonight, through her closed door, she could hear their voices getting louder. Not angry, just careless. The kind of loud that came when adults forgot children were listening. Maren pressed her bear close to her chest and whispered to it, like she always did. "It's okay, we just have to be really, really quiet. If we're quiet enough, maybe they'll forget we're here." She had learned that being forgotten was sometimes safer than being noticed. Outside her window, the neighborhood settled into its evening routine. Somewhere, families were sitting down to dinner together. Somewhere, children were being tucked into bed with stories and goodnight kisses. But in Maren's small room, she sat alone in the darkness, counting the hours until morning, when she could start her careful routine all over again. She didn't know that earlier that day, a powerful man had seen her fall. She didn't know that he had noticed the marks she tried so hard to hide. She didn't know that someone, for the first time in a very long time, had decided not to look away. Kieran Voss was not a man who second-guessed his decisions. In his world, hesitation meant weakness, and weakness meant failure. He had built his empire on certainty, on the ability to see what others missed and act without emotion clouding his judgment. That morning, before he met Marin on the street, he had fired a senior manager without blinking. The man had tears in his eyes, mentioned his family, pleaded for another chance. Kieran had listened politely, then signed the termination papers anyway. "Business isn't personal," he had said, his voice calm and final. "You made poor decisions. Poor decisions have consequences." The manager had left his office defeated, and Kieran had moved on to his next meeting without a second thought. That was who he was. That was who he had always been, or so he thought. Now, sitting alone in his penthouse office as the city lights sparkled below, Kieran couldn't stop thinking about a little girl with marks on her arm and eyes that had seen too much. He had tried to return to work after their encounter. He had sat through an afternoon conference call, reviewed quarterly projections, approved 3 new contracts. But his mind kept drifting back to that quiet voice saying, "I'm used to it." Those 4 words haunted him in a way that nothing had in years. Kieran stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Somewhere out there, in one of those neighborhoods he rarely thought about, Marin was probably home by now. Was she safe? Was she scared? Did anyone in her life even notice the things he had noticed in just 5 minutes? He caught his own reflection in the glass and barely recognized himself. When had he become so cold? When had he decided that other people's pain wasn't his concern? The answer came to him with uncomfortable clarity. He had always been this way. He had survived by being this way. Kieran's own childhood was something he rarely allowed himself to think about. He had grown up in a state-run facility where children were numbers on charts, where affection was a luxury no one could afford, where the message was clear: "You're on your own, kid. Figure it out or fail." So he had figured it out. He had learned to be tough, to trust no one, to see every interaction as a transaction. By the time he was 18 and released into the world, he had perfected the art of emotional armor. That armor had served him well. It had helped him build wealth, power, and influence. It had protected him from disappointment and betrayal. But standing in his expensive office, staring at his own reflection, Kieran realized something that shook him to his core. That armor had also turned him into someone who could walk past suffering children and justify it as, "Not my problem." How many times had he done exactly that? How many times had he seen signs? Employees struggling, communities displaced by his development projects, people asking for help, and chosen convenience over compassion. He had become the kind of man who could look at human pain and see only numbers, statistics, acceptable losses. The little girl on the sidewalk had cracked something open inside him, something he thought he had sealed off permanently. Kieran pulled out his phone and stared at it for a long moment. He knew people, powerful people, connected people. He could make a few calls, set things in motion. But what exactly was he going to do? Storm into a stranger's home and demand answers? Call the authorities based on a brief encounter and a few marks on a child's arm? For the first time in decades, Kieran Voss felt uncertain. But uncertainty wasn't going to help Marin. Action would. He made his first call to someone he knew through his business connections, a social worker named Dr. Vivian Hayes. She had a reputation for being both compassionate and practical, someone who understood that helping people required more than good intentions. "Vivian, it's Kieran Voss," he said when she answered. "I need your advice on something. It's about a child." There was a brief pause. "Kieran Voss calling me about a child? This is unexpected." "I know." He took a breath. "But I saw something today that I can't ignore, and I need to know the right way to help." As he explained the encounter, he could hear the shift in Vivian's tone, from surprised to serious to concerned. "I can look into it," she said finally. "But Kieran, I have to ask, why do you care? You're not exactly known for your humanitarian work." He looked out at the city again, at all those lights representing all those lives he usually ignored. "Maybe it's time I started," he said quietly. For the first time in his carefully constructed life, Kieran Voss was choosing to care about someone else, and he had no idea that this single choice would change everything, not just for Marin, but for himself. Dr. Vivian Hayes was a woman who had seen enough broken systems to know that good intentions meant nothing without follow-through. When Kieran Voss called her about a little girl, she was skeptical. Wealthy businessmen didn't usually involve themselves in child welfare cases. But something in his voice made her take him seriously. She spent the next 2 days making quiet inquiries, pulling records, talking to the right people. What she discovered made her chest feel heavy. The pattern was always the same. People saw, people noticed, but nobody acted. The school saw. Marin's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had filed 3 separate reports over the past year. The first one, dated 9 months ago, noted, "Student frequently appears tired and hungry. Wears long sleeves in warm weather. Reluctant to participate in physical activities." The second report, 6 months ago, observed marks on students' arms during art class. When asked, student said she fell. Recommend wellness check. The third report, just 2 months ago, continued concerns about students' well-being. No improvement noted. Please advise next steps. Each report had been received, filed, and forgotten. There were procedures to follow, forms to complete, departments to contact. But with budget cuts and staff shortages, Marin's case became just another file in an overwhelmed system. Mrs. Patterson had tried. She had genuinely tried. But trying without support meant nothing changed. The doctor saw. 6 months earlier, Marin had been brought to the community health clinic for a routine checkup. The pediatrician on duty, Dr. Reeves, had noticed several concerning things during the examination. The child was underweight for her age. She had signs of poor nutrition. There were small marks and old injuries that didn't match the explanation of playing outside. The doctor had documented everything carefully and recommended immediate follow-up appointments for additional testing and evaluation. The family never returned for those appointments. Dr. Reeves had sent reminder letters. He had called the number on file twice. No response. Eventually, the case was marked, lost to follow-up, and closed. He had wondered about that little girl occasionally, hoped she was all right. But he had 100 other patients who needed him too. The neighbors heard. The Caldwell family lived 3 houses down from the Holloways. Margaret Caldwell had noticed things changing on that street over the past year. She would see the little girl walking to school alone in clothes that weren't quite right for the weather. She heard raised voices through open windows on summer evenings, not screaming, but tension that carried across yards. One night, about 4 months ago, she had heard something that made her pick up the phone. She couldn't make out words, but she heard a child crying, furniture moving, doors slamming. She called the social services hotline and made an anonymous report. A caseworker had called the Holloway home, spoken briefly with the father, and noted that family denied any problems and declined in-home visit. Without evidence of immediate danger, the case was closed. Margaret sometimes saw Marin in the mornings and felt a pang of guilt. Should she have done more? But what could she do? It wasn't her place to interfere with how other people raised their children, was it? Nobody acted. When Vivian compiled all this information and sat down with Kieran in a quiet coffee shop, she laid out the papers between them like evidence at a trial. "This is what I found," she said, her voice steady but sad. "The school saw. The doctor saw. The neighbors heard." Kieran looked through each document, his jaw tightening with every page. "And nobody did anything," he said, more statement than question. "They did something," Vivian corrected gently. "They filed reports. They made calls. They followed procedures. But procedures without resources, without coordination, without anyone willing to push harder." She paused. That little girl fell through every crack in a system that's supposed to catch children exactly like her. Kieran was silent for a long moment, staring at Mrs. Patterson's last report. The teacher had written in the margin, in small handwriting, "I'm worried about this child. Please help." He thought about all the times in his own life when he had seen problems and waited for someone else to fix them. He thought about the manager he had fired that morning without asking if there was more to the story. He thought about all the ways he had contributed to a world where people looked away from pain because it was easier than getting involved. "So, what do we do now?" he asked, looking up at Vivienne. She met his eyes with the kind of determination that came from years of fighting broken systems. "Now," she said, "we stop waiting for someone else to care. We act." Dale Holloway hadn't always been the man he was now. There were photographs tucked away in a drawer that told a different story. A younger Dale smiling proudly on his wedding day, holding baby Maren in the hospital, standing in front of his first job site wearing a hard hat. But that was before the factory closed. Before the bills started piling up faster than he could count them. Before his wife's health deteriorated and the medical costs became impossible. Before the weight of it all became too heavy to carry sober. That's when Garrett showed up. Garrett Maines was an old acquaintance from Dale's past, the kind of friend who appeared when life was falling apart and offered simple solutions to complicated problems. He started coming around about a year ago, always with a 12-pack in hand and an easy smile that promised escape from reality. "Just helping out an old buddy," Garrett would say, settling into the worn armchair like he belonged there. What made Garrett truly dangerous wasn't violence or cruelty. It was something far more subtle. He had a way of making bad situations feel normal, of convincing Dale that another drink wouldn't hurt, that responsibility could wait until tomorrow, that the problems would somehow solve themselves. "Kids are resilient," Garrett would say with a shrug when Dale expressed guilt about Maren. "She'll be fine. You're doing the best you can." Dale wanted desperately to believe that. So he did. Gradually, Garrett's presence became constant. He had a key. He knew where everything was kept. He treated the Holloway home like his own, and neither Dale nor Celeste had the energy to push back. Maren learned to recognize the sound of Garrett's truck pulling up outside. When she heard it, she would quietly gather her things and retreat to her room. She would sit on her bed with her stuffed bear, doing homework or reading library books, making herself as small and silent as possible. Garrett never yelled at her. He never threatened her directly. But he had a way of looking through her, as if she wasn't even there. When she walked into a room, he wouldn't acknowledge her. When she spoke, he would talk over her as if she hadn't said anything at all. To Garrett, Maren was an inconvenience, a complication in his friend's already complicated life. And Dale, drowning in his own despair, allowed this dismissal to happen. He told himself that at least Garrett was helping with rent sometimes, bringing food occasionally, keeping him company in the darkness. He didn't see what that help was costing his daughter. Celeste saw it from her place on the couch, too weak to intervene, too dependent on Dale for everything to risk conflict. She would watch Maren disappear into her room when Garrett arrived, and guilt would wash over her in waves. But guilt without action changed nothing. Late one evening, after Garrett had finally left, Maren emerged from her room to get water. She found her father asleep in his chair, an empty bottle on the floor beside him. Her mother was already in bed, the house dark and quiet. Maren stood in the kitchen for a moment, holding her glass of water, looking at the shadowy outlines of a home that used to feel safe. She whispered to the empty room, practicing words she would never say out loud. "I don't like it when he's here. He makes everything feel wrong." But there was no one to hear her, and Garrett would be back tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that, a poison working slowly, normalizing a chaos that was swallowing her childhood piece by piece. Kieran Voss had learned long ago that power meant nothing if you didn't know how to use it properly. Over the next week, he assembled a team with the kind of precision he usually reserved for business acquisitions. Dr. Vivian Hayes became his guide through the complicated world of child welfare. She explained the legal requirements, the proper procedures, the delicate balance between protecting a child and respecting family rights. "We can't just storm in there," she warned him during one of their planning meetings. "If we move too aggressively without proper documentation, we could make things worse for Maren. The family could shut down completely, move away, or the case could get thrown out before we can actually help." Kieran listened, absorbing every word. For a man used to making quick decisions and demanding immediate results, this slow, careful approach felt frustrating. But he was learning that helping people wasn't like closing a business deal. The second person he brought in was Dr. Marcus Webb, a pediatrician with 30 years of experience who understood that children's health extended far beyond physical symptoms. Marcus had kind eyes and a gentle manner that put scared children at ease. "I'll need to do a complete examination," Marcus explained. "Document everything properly. If there are medical concerns, we'll have evidence that can't be dismissed." Together, they created a plan that would follow every legal protocol while still moving as quickly as possible. The first step was an official home visit from Dr. Vivian. As a licensed social worker with proper credentials, she had the authority to check on Marin's welfare. Dale Holloway would receive a letter informing him of the visit 48 hours in advance. Enough time to be legal, but not enough time to hide everything. When the letter arrived at the Holloway home, Dale's hands shook as he read it. Celeste, sitting up on the couch for the first time in days, looked at him with worried eyes. "What does this mean?" she asked, her voice weak. "It means someone's been asking questions," Dale said, crumpling the letter in his fist. "It means we have to—" He stopped, looking around at their small, messy home with new eyes. He saw what others would see: the disorder, the neglect, the evidence of a family falling apart. Garrett, who was lounging in his usual chair, sat up straight. "Maybe I should make myself scarce for a few days," he said casually, already reaching for his jacket. Dale didn't argue. Part of him felt relief at Garrett's absence. Part of him felt terrified to face everything alone. Meanwhile, Marin was at school when the letter arrived. She came home that afternoon to find her father frantically cleaning, her mother trying to help from the couch, and Garrett's truck missing from its usual spot outside. Something was different. Something was changing. "Marin," her father said, his voice strained. "Some people are coming to visit in 2 days. Social workers. They're going to ask you questions." Marin's stomach dropped. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," Dale said quickly, then paused. Just tell them everything's fine, okay? Tell them we're doing fine." Marin nodded slowly, but her heart was racing. She recognized the tone in her father's voice, desperation mixed with fear. She had learned over the past year to read these signals, to know when adults were scared, and when their fear meant she needed to be extra careful. That night, she lay in her bed holding her stuffed bear, whispering to it like always. "They're coming in 2 days. I have to be really good. I have to say the right things. I have to help Daddy." But somewhere across the city, in a penthouse office, Kieran Voss stood at his window looking out at the lights and thought about a little girl he had met only once. A girl who believed her job was to protect adults instead of the other way around. 2 days felt like 2 years in the Holloway household. Dale had cleaned obsessively, trying to make their small home look presentable. Celeste had pushed through her exhaustion to sit upright on the couch, wearing her nicest sweater, and Marin had practiced what to say, rehearsing answers in her head like lines in a school play. When the doorbell rang at exactly 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning, all 3 of them flinched. Dale opened the door to find Dr. Vivian Hayes standing on the porch. She wore professional clothes and carried a leather folder, but her smile was warm and genuine. "Good morning, Mr. Holloway. I'm Dr. Vivian Hayes. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me today." "We didn't exactly have a choice," Dale muttered, then caught himself. "Sorry, please come in." Vivian stepped inside, taking in the scene with experienced eyes. The house was cleaner than she expected, but she could see the signs of rushed preparation. Items stuffed hastily into corners, fresh vacuum marks on the carpet, the faint smell of cleaning products covering older odors. Celeste sat on the couch, looking fragile but determined. And in the corner, almost hidden behind a chair, was Marin. "You must be Marin," Vivian said gently, crouching down to the girl's level. "I'm Dr. Hayes. I'm here to talk with your family today. Is that okay?" Marin nodded silently, her eyes wide and cautious. For the next 30 minutes, Vivian spoke with Dale and Celeste. She asked about their situation, Dale's unemployment, Celeste's health condition, their financial struggles. She was neither judgmental nor accusatory, simply gathering information with professional compassion. Dale tried to present everything in the best possible light. Yes, times were hard. Yes, they were struggling. But they were managing. They were doing their best. Marin was fine. Look at her, she's a good kid, gets decent grades, no trouble at school. Celeste added little, her energy fading visibly as the conversation continued. Finally, Vivian closed her folder and looked at Dale directly. "Mr. Holloway, I'd like to speak with Marin alone for a few minutes. Just standard procedure. Would that be all right?" Dale's jaw tightened. He glanced at Marin, then back at Vivian. "What are you going to ask her?" "Just age-appropriate questions about how she's doing. Nothing frightening, I promise." The silence that followed felt enormous. Marin watched her father's face, waiting for his permission to speak, waiting to know what she was supposed to do. Finally, Dale nodded stiffly. 5 minutes. Vivian stood and extended her hand toward Marin. "Would you like to show me your room?" Marin hesitated, then took her hand. Her palm was small and cold. In Marin's tiny bedroom, Vivian sat on the floor rather than the bed, making herself less imposing. Marin sat across from her, clutching her stuffed bear. "That's a nice bear," Vivian said softly. "Does he have a name?" "Button," Marin whispered. "Button is a perfect name." Vivian paused, choosing her words carefully. "Marin, I want you to know something important. My job is to make sure kids are safe and healthy. That's all. I'm not here to get anyone in trouble. I'm here to help. Do you understand?" Marin nodded, but her shoulders were tense. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," Vivian continued, "but I'm here to listen if you do." For a long moment, Marin said nothing. Then, in a voice barely audible, she asked the question that broke Vivian's heart. "Are you going to take me away?" The fear in those words, the resignation, the terrible acceptance that being taken away might be what she deserved. It was everything Vivian had feared she would find. "I don't know yet," Vivian answered honestly. "But I promise you this. Whatever happens, we're going to make sure you're safe, okay?" Marin's grip on Button tightened. Through the thin walls, she could hear her parents' muffled voices in the living room, tense and worried. She had no idea that this conversation was just the beginning, or that outside, powerful wheels were already turning to change her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. 3 days after Dr. Vivian's visit, Marin sat in Dr. Marcus Webb's office for what her father had called just a regular checkup. But Marin knew it wasn't regular. Nothing felt regular anymore. The medical office was bright and cheerful, with colorful posters of animals on the walls and a small basket of toys in the corner. Dr. Webb had silver hair and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. "Hello, Marin," he said warmly, sitting on a rolling stool so they were eye level. "I'm Dr. Webb. I'm going to do some simple tests today to make sure you're growing healthy and strong. Is that okay with you?" Marin nodded, glancing at her father who sat stiffly in a chair by the door. The examination started with basic measurements: height, weight, blood pressure. Dr. Webb narrated everything he was doing in a gentle conversational tone that made the clinical procedures feel less frightening. "You're 8 years old, right? Let me check something." He consulted his growth chart, then made some notes. His expression remained neutral, but his pen moved with more urgency than before. Next came questions about how Marin felt day to day. Did she get tired easily? Did she ever feel dizzy? How was her appetite? Marin answered carefully, aware of her father's presence. "I'm okay," she said to most questions. "I feel fine." But Dr. Webb had examined thousands of children over 3 decades. He knew the difference between fine and actually fine. When he gently examined her arms, looking at the marks that had first caught Kieran's attention, Marin went very still. She had learned to disappear inside herself during uncomfortable moments. "These marks," Dr. Webb said softly. "Can you tell me how they happened?" "I fell," Marin said automatically, the rehearsed answer coming easily. "You must fall quite a bit," Dr. Webb observed gently, noting that the marks were at different stages of healing, some old and faded, some more recent. Marin didn't respond. Dr. Webb then did something Marin hadn't expected. He stopped examining her and just sat quietly for a moment, looking at her with such genuine concern that her carefully built walls almost cracked. "Marin," he said softly, "I want to do a few more tests. Just some simple blood work to check your iron levels and make sure everything is working properly inside your body. It might pinch for just a second, but then it'll be over. Is that okay? Is it gonna hurt a lot? She asked, her voice small. Just a tiny pinch, like a mosquito bite, he promised. And afterward, you can pick a sticker from my special collection. 20 minutes later, after the blood had been drawn and Maren had carefully selected a butterfly sticker, Dr. Webb asked Dale to step into his office while a nurse stayed with Maren in the waiting room. Mr. Holloway, Dr. Webb said, closing the door behind them. I need to be direct with you. The preliminary examination shows several concerning things. Dale's face went pale. Your daughter is significantly underweight for her age and height. Her blood pressure is lower than it should be, which combined with her pallor suggests possible anemia. She has visible signs of poor nutrition over an extended period. The blood work will confirm specifics, but I can tell you right now that this child is not receiving adequate care. We're doing the best we can, Dale said defensively. Do you know what it's like trying to feed a family with no job? With a sick wife? I understand your situation is difficult, Dr. Webb said firmly, but not unkindly. But Maren's health cannot wait for your situation to improve. She needs intervention now. Medical intervention, nutritional support, and honestly, Mr. Holloway, she needs a stable environment where her basic needs are consistently met. Dale slumped in his chair. What happens now? Now, Dr. Webb said, I document everything. I send my findings to Dr. Hayes, and together with other professionals, we determine the best path forward for Maren's well-being. When Dale and Maren left the office, she held her butterfly sticker carefully. In the car, Dale gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. Did I do something bad? Maren asked quietly. No, baby, Dale said, his voice cracking. No, you didn't do anything bad. But they both knew that everything was about to change. And for the first time, Maren felt something unfamiliar stirring beneath her fear. A tiny, fragile seed of hope that maybe, just maybe, someone actually cared. That evening, Kieran sat alone in his penthouse office with Dr. Webb's report spread across his desk. The clinical language documented what he had suspected: severe anemia, chronic malnutrition, developmental delays, signs of prolonged neglect. But it was the final note that hit him hardest. Patient demonstrates fear response inconsistent with normal medical examination. Child appears trained to minimize pain and discomfort. Recommend immediate psychological evaluation. Trained to minimize pain. Kieran pushed back from his desk and walked to the window. The city stretched out below him, millions of lights representing millions of lives. How many other children were out there right now, learning to hide their suffering? How many were being trained to disappear? He caught his reflection in the darkened glass and saw something he'd been avoiding for weeks. Shame. Kieran had spent his entire adult life believing he'd escaped his past. He'd built an empire, commanded respect, accumulated wealth and power. He thought he'd become someone completely different from the scared, abandoned boy in that state facility. But the truth was uglier than that. He hadn't escaped his past. He'd become a different kind of victim of it. He'd learned all the wrong lessons. Don't trust anyone. Don't let emotions cloud judgment. Look out for yourself because no one else will. Those survival strategies had made him successful. They'd also made him cruel. Kieran thought about the manager he'd fired without asking questions. The man had mentioned his family, and Kieran had dismissed it as manipulation. What if it wasn't? What if that man had a daughter at home who needed him? He thought about the development project he'd pushed through last year, displacing a low-income neighborhood. The residents had protested, talked about their children's schools, their community. Kieran had seen only numbers and property values. He'd never once asked what happened to those families afterward. He thought about all the times he'd driven through struggling neighborhoods in his expensive car, looked at children playing in run-down parks, and thought nothing of it. They weren't his problem. They weren't his responsibility. He'd become exactly the type of person who had looked at him as a child and decided he didn't matter. The realization made his chest feel tight. He'd spent 40 years building walls to protect himself from pain, and in the process he'd become someone who inflicted pain through indifference. Maren had cracked those walls. One little girl with marks on her arm and acceptance in her voice had shown him the truth about himself, and it wasn't pretty. His phone buzzed. A text from Vivienne. Meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. We need to make decisions about next steps. Are you still committed to seeing this through? Kieran stared at the message for a long moment. He could walk away right now. He'd done his part, reported the concern, connected the professionals. He could return to his comfortable life and let the system handle it. That's what the old Kieran would have done. He typed back, "I'll be there. Whatever she needs, whatever it costs." But as he hit send, he knew this wasn't really about money or resources. This was about something he'd never done before, staying present for someone else's pain instead of walking away. He sat back down at his desk and opened his laptop. In the search bar, he typed, "How to help a child in crisis." For the first time in decades, Kieran Voss admitted he didn't have all the answers. And that admission, that vulnerability, was the beginning of becoming someone worth being. The meeting took place in a neutral office, not a courtroom, but not casual either. Dale Holloway sat across from Kieran Voss, Dr. Vivienne Hayes, and a Child Protective Services representative named Ms. Eleanor Grant. The atmosphere was tense with unspoken truths. Dale looked exhausted. He'd barely slept in days, knowing this moment was coming. Behind him, through the doorway, Celeste sat in the waiting area, too weak to participate but refusing to stay home. Vivienne opened a folder and laid out the documents methodically. School reports, medical findings, the timeline of ignored warnings. Each page was another piece of evidence that this family was drowning. "Mr. Holloway," she began, her voice firm but not unkind. "We're not here to attack you. We're here because your daughter is not thriving, she's not safe, and you need to understand the severity of this situation." Dale's hands clenched on the armrests of his chair. "I love my daughter. I've never—" "This isn't about love," Vivienne interrupted gently. "I believe you love Maren. But love without action isn't enough. Your daughter is malnourished. She's anemic. She has injuries that she won't explain. She's scared, Mr. Holloway, constantly scared." Dale's eyes filled with tears. "I lost my job. My wife is sick. Do you know what it's like watching everything fall apart and not being able to fix it?" "I do know," Kieran said quietly, speaking for the first time. His voice was measured but held unexpected emotion. "I know what it's like to feel powerless." "But you're not powerless, Mr. Holloway. You made choices." Dale looked at him with confusion and anger. "Who are you to judge me? You with your expensive suit and your perfect life." "I grew up in a state facility where nobody cared if I lived or died," Kieran said, his voice steady but raw. "I know what it feels like to be invisible. So yes, I'm judging you, because your daughter doesn't have the luxury of waiting for you to figure things out." The room went silent. Ms. Grant leaned forward. "Mr. Holloway, we need to ask you about Garrett Maines. How often is he in your home?" Dale shifted uncomfortably. "He's a friend. He helps out sometimes." The school reports mention that Maren's behavior changed significantly around the time Mr. Maines became a regular presence in your home, Vivienne added. "Can you explain that?" "Garrett's not the problem," Dale said defensively. "Then what is the problem?" Kieran asked pointedly. "Where was Garrett when those marks appeared on your daughter's arm?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Dale opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. His face crumbled. For the first time, he seemed to truly see what he'd been avoiding, that his choices, his drinking, his passive acceptance of Garrett's presence, all of it had created an environment where his daughter suffered. From the waiting area, they heard Celeste begin to cry. Not quiet tears, but deep, wrenching sobs of someone finally facing unbearable guilt. And in a small classroom 3 miles away, Maren sat at her desk during quiet reading time. She held a book open in front of her, but she wasn't reading. She was listening to the classroom clock tick, counting the minutes until she had to go home. She whispered to herself so quietly that no one could hear. "I knew this was my fault. I should have been better. I should have been quieter." She didn't know that at that very moment, adults were finally fighting for her. She didn't know that the silence was about to be broken. She didn't know that the scariest part, the part where everything changed, was just beginning. But she would learn soon that sometimes the scariest changes are the ones that save you. The words hit Dale like a physical blow. "We're recommending temporary removal of Marin from the home. Ms." Grant continued in her professional tone, though her eyes were sympathetic. "This isn't permanent, Mr. Holloway, but your daughter needs immediate stability while we work with your family to address the underlying issues. She needs consistent meals, medical care, and a safe environment." "You can't just take her," Dale said, his voice breaking. "She's my daughter. We're her family." "And family means protecting her," Vivian said firmly. "Right now, you're not able to do that. We're not punishing you, Mr. Holloway. We're helping Marin. And we're offering you resources to get back on your feet: addiction counseling, job placement services, family therapy. But Marin can't wait while you heal." Dale looked desperately at Kieran. "You started this. You could stop it." Kieran met his eyes without flinching. "No, I can't and I won't." "When?" Dale whispered. "When are you taking her?" "Today," Ms. Grant said gently. "We have a foster family ready, the Thornfields. They're experienced, compassionate, and they understand what Marin needs." "Today?" Dale's voice rose in panic. "You mean right now? I don't even get to." "You'll have supervised visitation," Vivian assured him. "This isn't goodbye forever. But we need to act quickly for Marin's well-being." When they arrived at Marin's school that afternoon, she was called to the principal's office. She walked down the hallway with her teacher, her heart hammering. Getting called to the office was never good news. Dr. Vivian was waiting there with a woman Marin had never seen before. A kind-faced lady with gray hair and gentle eyes who introduced herself as Ms. Grant. "Marin, honey," Vivian said, crouching down to her level. "We need to talk to you about something important. Can you sit down?" Marin sat, clutching her backpack straps. "Where's my dad?" "Your dad is okay. Your mom is okay. But we've made a decision to help you and your family." Vivian chose her words carefully. "For a little while, you're going to stay with a different family, a nice couple who take care of children who need extra help." Marin's eyes went wide with terror. "I'm being taken away?" "You're being kept safe," Vivian corrected gently. "There's a difference." "But I didn't—" Marin's voice cracked. "Did I do something bad? Is this because I told the doctor my arm hurt? I can say it doesn't hurt. I can be better. I promise I can be so much better." The desperation in her voice made Ms. Grant's eyes fill with tears. "Oh, sweetheart, no," Vivian said, taking Marin's small hands in hers. "You didn't do anything wrong. Nothing about this is your fault. Do you understand me? You are not being punished." But Marin was already crying, scared and confused. "I want my mom. I want to go home." "I know," Vivian said softly. "I know this is scary. But the people you're going to stay with, the Thornfields, they're really nice. They have a guest room just for you, and a dog named Biscuit, and they make really good pancakes." Marin wasn't listening. Her whole world was collapsing. Everything she'd tried so hard to hold together was falling apart, and she didn't understand why. That evening, with a small suitcase of her belongings and Button the bear clutched tightly to her chest, Marin was driven to a house she'd never seen, to live with people she didn't know. Through the car window, she watched her neighborhood disappear. She didn't know that sometimes falling apart is the only way to start putting yourself back together. And she didn't know that the scariest word in her life, change, was about to become the word that saved her. The Thornfield house was nothing like Marin expected. It was a small, tidy home with a blue front door and flowers in the garden. When the car pulled into the driveway, Marin saw an older couple standing on the porch, a man with white hair and kind eyes, and a woman with a warm smile and soft sweater. "Hello, Marin," the woman said gently as Marin climbed out of the car. "I'm Eleanor, and this is my husband, Thomas. We're so glad you're here." Marin said nothing. She held Button tighter and kept her eyes on the ground. "Come inside when you're ready," Eleanor said, not pushing. "No rush." The inside of the house smelled like vanilla and something baking. The furniture was comfortable but not fancy. There were photos on the walls, pictures of children at different ages, some who looked like they might have been foster children too. "This is your room," Eleanor said, opening a door at the end of the hallway. Maren stepped inside cautiously. The room had a single bed with a colorful quilt, a small desk, a bookshelf with actual books, and curtains with stars on them. It was clean. It was safe. It was more than she'd ever had. "You can arrange things however you like," Thomas said from the doorway. "This is your space." Maren nodded, but didn't move. She stood in the middle of the room, still holding her small suitcase and button, looking lost. "Are you hungry?" Eleanor asked. "Dinner will be ready in about 20 minutes. We're having chicken and vegetables. Do you like chicken?" Maren nodded again, though she barely heard the question. That first evening was quiet and careful. Maren sat at the dinner table and ate small bites, watching everything with wary eyes. Eleanor and Thomas talked to each other about ordinary things: the garden, a book Thomas was reading, plans to fix the back fence. They didn't interrogate Maren or demand conversation. They just let her be. After dinner, Eleanor showed Maren where the bathroom was, gave her fresh towels, and said goodnight. "If you need anything during the night, our door is right across the hall. You're safe here, Maren, okay?" Maren nodded, but she didn't believe it. Safety wasn't something she understood anymore. That night, Eleanor found Maren sitting in the corner of her new room, still fully dressed, with her back against the wall and button clutched to her chest. She hadn't unpacked. She hadn't gotten ready for bed. She was just sitting there watching the door like she expected something bad to happen. Eleanor's heart broke a little. She'd fostered many children over 20 years, and she recognized this behavior. A child waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the kindness to end, for the punishment to begin. She sat down on the floor a few feet away from Maren, not too close, not touching. "You know what I think is amazing about stars?" Eleanor said quietly, looking at the curtains. "They're always there, even when we can't see them. On cloudy nights when it seems dark, the stars are still shining. We just can't see them yet." Maren glanced at her but said nothing. "You're safe here, Maren," Eleanor continued, her voice steady and sure. "No one will hurt you. No one will yell. And you don't need to earn that safety by being perfect or invisible. You just get to be a kid. That's all you have to do. Just be 8 years old." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, almost imperceptibly, Maren's shoulders relaxed just a fraction. "Can I keep my light on?" she whispered. "Of course," Eleanor said. "You can keep it on all night, every night if you want." 2 days later, Maren ate breakfast at the table, a whole piece of toast with jam. 3 days after that, she asked if she could pet Biscuit, the elderly golden retriever who spent most of his time napping in sunny spots. Small steps, tiny victories, but they were steps forward. And for the first time in a very long time, Maren went to sleep without counting crackers or hiding food, or listening for dangerous footsteps outside her door. While Maren slowly adjusted to life with the Thornfields, change was happening in other places too, though not always smoothly. Celeste Holloway sat in a clean, bright office at the community health center, meeting with her new doctor. For the first time in 2 years, she had a proper treatment plan. Medications that were actually working. Physical therapy appointments twice a week. A social worker who checked in regularly. The care was made possible by a health program that someone had anonymously funded. Celeste didn't know that Kieran Voss had quietly written a check that covered everything her insurance wouldn't. "How are you feeling today, Mrs. Holloway?" her doctor asked. "Stronger," Celeste admitted, "but also guilty. I should have done more for Maren. I was so focused on my own pain that I didn't see hers." "You're seeing it now," the doctor said gently. "That's what matters. You can't change the past, but you can change what comes next." Across town, Dale sat in a circle of folding chairs at his 3rd mandatory counseling session. The room smelled like bad coffee and old carpet, and every person there looked as uncomfortable as he felt. "I'm Dale," he said when it was his turn. "And I let my daughter down." Saying it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. The other men in the group nodded, some with understanding, some with their own shame. The counselor leading the group, a man named Robert, who'd been sober for 15 years, spoke up. That's the first step, Dale, admitting it. Now comes the hard part, doing the work to be better. Dale attended every session. He completed the worksheets. He got a part-time job at a warehouse. Not glamorous, but honest work with steady hours. Every week, he met with a family therapist who helped him understand how his choices had created an unsafe environment for Maren. But it wasn't smooth. 3 weeks into the program, Dale almost quit. He showed up to a session angry and defensive. "What's the point?" he snapped at Robert. "They took my kid. I'm doing all this work and she's still not coming home." "Because it takes time to rebuild trust," Robert said calmly. "You didn't break it in a day. You won't fix it in a day either." Dale slumped in his chair, the fight draining out of him. "I miss her." "Then keep showing up," Robert said. "Keep doing the work. Show her you're serious." Meanwhile, authorities had tracked down Garrett Maines. He was questioned, his history examined. It turned out he had a pattern, always attaching himself to vulnerable families, always creating chaos, always disappearing when things got serious. A restraining order was filed. Garrett was legally prohibited from contacting the Holloway family. When Dale heard the news, he felt something unexpected, relief mixed with shame that he'd ever let that man into his home. Celeste missed a therapy appointment 4 weeks in. She called the clinic from bed, her voice weak. "I can't make it today, I'm too tired." Her social worker, Karen, showed up at her door 2 hours later with soup and determination. "You don't get to give up now," Karen said, not unkindly. "Your daughter is working hard to heal. You need to work just as hard," Celeste cried. Then she ate the soup. Then she rescheduled the appointment. Progress wasn't a straight line. It was messy and difficult and full of setbacks. But for the first time, there was structure. There was support. There were people who wouldn't let them quit. At the end of each week, Dale and Celeste had supervised visits with Maren at a family services center. The first few visits were awkward and painful. Maren barely spoke. Dale didn't know what to say. Celeste cried too much. But slowly, week by week, things shifted. Dale learned to ask better questions. "What did you learn in school this week?" Instead of "Are you okay?" Celeste learned to listen more and apologize less. And Maren, sitting between her biological parents and the life she was building with the Thornfields, began to understand something important. Healing wasn't about choosing between two families. It was about learning what family was supposed to feel like in the first place. 3 months had passed since Maren moved in with the Thornfields. She had gained weight. Her color was better. She smiled more often, though the smiles were still careful and measured. Dr. Vivian had been visiting regularly for therapy sessions, using play and art to help Maren process everything that had happened. Today they sat together in the Thornfields' sunny living room with crayons and paper spread across the coffee table. "Will you draw me a picture of a house?" Vivian asked gently. Maren picked up a brown crayon and started drawing. She made a small square house with a pointed roof. She drew windows but colored them dark, no light coming through. She drew a door, but no doorknob. When she was finished, the house looked closed off, locked tight. "Tell me about this house," Vivian said. "It's where people live," Maren said simply. "Is it a happy house?" Maren shrugged. She picked up a blue crayon and started coloring the sky, pressing so hard the paper nearly tore. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Biscuit snored softly in his bed by the window. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. Everything felt safe and ordinary. Then Maren stopped coloring. She put the crayon down carefully, lining it up exactly with the others. She stared at the picture of the dark house for a long moment. "Dr. Vivian?" she said quietly. "Yes, honey." Maren's hands twisted together in her lap. She was working up the courage to ask something she'd been thinking about for weeks. Her voice, when it came, was small but clear. "If I behave really, really good, can I stay somewhere safe forever?" The question hung in the air like something fragile and devastating. Vivian felt her throat tighten. She'd worked with traumatized children for 15 years. But this question, this terrible, heartbreaking question, cut deeper than almost anything she'd heard before. The words revealed everything. Maren didn't just fear being hurt. She'd internalized something far more damaging. the belief that safety was conditional, that protection was something you earned through perfect behavior, that love and security could be taken away if you weren't good enough. She believed she had to deserve basic human care. Vivian carefully set down her own crayon and turned to face Maren fully. She reached out slowly, giving Maren time to pull away if she wanted, and took the little girl's hands gently in her own. "Maren, sweetheart, look at me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Maren looked up, her eyes wide and vulnerable. "You don't have to behave to be safe," Vivian said firmly, making sure Maren heard every word. "You don't have to earn it. You don't have to be perfect. You deserve to be safe just because you exist. Just because you're Maren. That's enough. You are enough." Maren's lower lip trembled. "But what if I'm not? What if I mess up?" "Everyone messes up," Vivian said. "I mess up. Eleanor messes up. Your teachers mess up. That's part of being human. But messing up doesn't mean you deserve to be hurt or scared. Do you understand?" Maren's face crumpled. For the first time since everything had changed, she truly cried. Not quiet tears of fear, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere she'd kept locked away for so long. Vivienne pulled her close, and Maren let herself be held. She cried for the home that hadn't felt safe. She cried for the meals she'd counted and hidden. She cried for all the times she'd made herself invisible, thinking that was how to survive. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, saw what was happening, and quietly brought tissues. She sat nearby, ready if needed, but giving them space. When the crying finally slowed, Maren pulled back and looked at Vivian with red, swollen eyes. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know," Vivian said. "Being safe can be scary when you're not used to it. But you're learning. Every day you're learning." Maren wiped her eyes with the tissue Eleanor handed her. She looked at the drawing of the dark house, then picked up a yellow crayon. Carefully, deliberately, she drew a small circle of light in one of the windows. Just one window, just one light. But it was a beginning. 6 months had passed since that afternoon when Kieran Voss helped a little girl stand up on a sidewalk. 6 months since he noticed marks on her arm and chose not to look away. The city hadn't literally stopped that day. But in all the ways that mattered, something fundamental had shifted. Maren was still living with the Thornfields, though the arrangement was evolving. Dale had completed his rehabilitation program and was working steadily. Celeste's health had improved dramatically with proper treatment. Together they were attending family therapy sessions and rebuilding, slowly, carefully, the trust they had broken. The court had approved supervised overnight visits. Last weekend, Maren had stayed with her parents for the first time in months. It hadn't been perfect. Dale had burned the dinner. Celeste had gotten tired early, but Maren had slept in her old room with Button the bear, and when she woke up, her father had made pancakes. Lumpy, slightly burnt pancakes, but made with love. "How was it?" Eleanor had asked when Maren returned to the Thornfield house. "It was okay," Maren said, and the word okay felt like a miracle. Not great, not terrible, just okay. And okay was progress. At Maren's school, something had changed too. Mrs. Patterson had pushed for a school-wide training on recognizing signs of children in distress. Teachers learned to look beyond grades and behavior to see the quiet ones, the ones who tried too hard to be invisible. 3 other children had been identified and connected with support services. 3 more invisible kids who were now being seen. The community health center where Celeste received treatment started a program for families dealing with chronic illness and financial hardship. They offered coordinated care, medical, mental health, and social services all working together instead of separately. The program was funded by an anonymous donation so large that it would run for years. Dr. Webb, the pediatrician who had examined Maren, now volunteered there one evening a week, making sure vulnerable children got the care they needed. And Kieran Voss had changed most of all. He had established the Maren Foundation, though Maren herself didn't know it was named after her. The foundation trained professionals to identify at-risk children early and provided resources to keep families together when possible, or safe alternatives when necessary. Kieran still ran his business empire, but now he ran it differently. He asked more questions. He considered more consequences. He remembered that behind every decision were real people, with real lives. He visited Maren once a month, always with Eleanor present, never pushing for more than she was comfortable with. They had quiet conversations about school, about books, about nothing in particular. He wasn't trying to be a father figure, he was just showing up consistently, proving that adults could be trusted to care without wanting something in return. On a bright Saturday afternoon in early spring, Maren played in a public park near the Thornfield house. She wore a purple jacket she had picked out herself and new sneakers that actually fit. Her hair was pulled back with a bright yellow clip, and her face had color in it, healthy, rosy color. Eleanor had brought bubble solution, and Maren chased the bubbles across the grass, laughing as Biscuit tried to catch them with his mouth. Thomas sat on a bench reading the newspaper, occasionally looking up to smile at the scene. Nearby, other families played. Parents pushed children on swings. A father taught his son to throw a baseball. A mother helped her toddler navigate the climbing structure. For the first time in her life, Maren was just another child at a park. Not invisible, not carrying secrets. Just a kid playing on a sunny day. From his car parked across the street, Kieran watched for just a moment. He saw Maren jump to catch a bubble, miss it, and laugh anyway. He saw Eleanor cheer her on. He saw what normal childhood was supposed to look like. Maren hadn't needed him to be a hero. She'd needed him to care enough to act. He started his car and drove away, knowing he didn't need to stay. She was safe now, she was seen, she was protected. And somewhere in the city, there were other children like Maren, invisible kids carrying invisible burdens. But now, because one man had chosen to stop and help instead of walking past, a whole community was learning to look closer, ask harder questions, and act with courage instead of comfort. Because that's what it takes to protect a child. Not one hero making a dramatic gesture, but a community of people choosing every single day to see suffering and refuse to ignore it. Maren caught a bubble on her finger and watched it shimmer in the sunlight before it popped. She smiled, a real smile, one that reached her eyes, and ran toward the next one. She was learning what every child deserves to know, that she mattered simply because she existed, that safety wasn't something she had to earn, that she could take up space in the world without apologizing for it. And watching from the bench, Eleanor whispered to Thomas, "She's going to be okay." Thomas squeezed his wife's hand. Yes, yes she is. The end.